All right, so we're diving into Watsuji Tetsuri today, and we've got this great article from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. You know, I'm really fascinated by Japanese thought, right? And this guy, this Watsuji, he's got some seriously interesting ideas about how, like, the world around us actually shapes who we are.
Yeah, Watsuji really pushes back against those typical Western assumptions.
Yeah.
It's like he was born in 1889, and he ends up being this huge voice in Japanese philosophy in the 20th century.
Right.
And it's amazing how he brings together like Eastern and Western ideas.
Yeah.
Like he's pulling from like Nietzsche and ancient Buddhist texts all at the same time. It's really interesting.
Yeah, that's totally what drew me to him, too.
Oh.
Even his background is super interesting,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, he was influenced by this novelist, Natsume Soseki,
Oh, yeah.
who basically said, Western individualism, it just makes people lonely.
Yeah.
And that idea, that critique of individualism, it's like a thread that runs through all of Watsuji's work.
Totally, yeah. He's really challenging this idea that we can even like understand ourselves just as individuals,
Right.
like separate from our environment, separate from our social connections. It just doesn't work for him.
So instead of like starting with the individual, it's almost like he flips the whole script
Right.
and says, hold on, the environment matters. Like, a lot.
Yes, exactly. And he goes way beyond just the physical environment. He uses this term fudo,
Right.
which often gets translated as like climate, but it's so much more than just like the weather.
Okay.
It's like, think of it as this massive web, right?
Yeah.
That includes like geography, social structures, historical context, even like technology. All of that stuff comes together to create this unique climate
Yeah.
that shapes a culture's values and worldview.
It's like we're all swimming in this food sea,
Right.
and it affects everything, like from our art to our ethics.
You got it. And here's where Watsuji goes head-to-head with another philosophical giant, Heidegger. You familiar with Heidegger?
Oh, yeah.
Being, twins, death, the individual's experience of time, all that.
Oh, I spent like a whole semester wrestling with being and time back in grad school.
Ooh, yeah, that's a tough one. Well, Watsuji argues that Heidegger's missing something really important. Like, he's so focused on time, right?
Yeah.
And the individual that he kind of forgets about, like space and our connections to other people.
Right.
For Watsuji, those relationships, that betweenness that we have with each other, that's just as important to who we are as our own, like, personal experience of time.
It's almost like he's saying, Heidegger, you're only seeing like half the picture.
Yeah.
And I can see how that would really resonate with someone coming from Japanese philosophy, where the whole collective, the group, has always been really important.
Absolutely. And that leads us to another big idea for Watsuji, ningen, which just means human being, right?
Okay.
But for Watsuji, it's not that simple.
Yeah.
He's highlighting that we're both individuals and social beings at the same time. Like, we're constantly navigating that tension between the two.
So he's not saying individualism is bad or anything. He's just saying it's incomplete. Like, we can't ignore the fact that we're all interconnected.
Exactly. And the place where that connection happens, where relationships form, that's what he calls gen, or betweenness.
Okay.
It's in the space of gen that our ethical actions, like, they unfold.
Yeah.
And they shape us, but they also shape the society that we're a part of.
This is getting really interesting. So if ethics is happening in that between space, does that mean, like, ethical rules are also kind of fluid?
That's a great question.
Like, they change depending on the fudo?
You're really getting to the core of Watsuji's ethical theory there. He definitely challenges the idea of universal, abstract ethical principles. Instead, it's more like, hey, ethics are grounded in the real concrete stuff of our relationships and the specific cultural climate that we live in.
So it's less about following some rule book
Right.
and more about understanding that web of connections that we're a part of and acting accordingly.
Exactly. And this is where his concept of the double negation comes in. It might sound a little complicated at first, but stick with me.
Okay.
He's basically saying that the individual and society are constantly negating each other.
Okay.
The individual, like, tries to assert their independence,
Right.
and then society, in turn, kind of limits individual freedom.
So it's this constant push and pull,
Yeah.
each side defining itself in relation to the other,
Yeah.
like a philosophical dance or something.
I like that. And that dance, that mutual negation, it ultimately reveals the emptiness, right, of both the individual and society as, like, these independent, fixed things.
Emptiness. Okay, hold on. Can you break that down a bit?
Yeah, so think of it this way. It's not like we don't exist, right? Or that society's meaningless. Watsuji is drawing on some Buddhist ideas here,
Hmm.
particularly this concept of interconnectedness. He's saying that our identities, like both as individuals and as a group, they're fluid, they're always being shaped by our relationships and that betweenness of like just existing.
So by recognizing this emptiness, we're actually seeing ourselves more clearly, in a way, acknowledging that we're part of something much bigger.
That's a great way to put it. And this brings us to a part of Watsuji's thought that's often debated,
Okay.
his view of the state.
Yeah, this is where I'm a little unsure, to be honest. I've heard he's been criticized for, like, endorsing totalitarian ideas.
Right.
And that seems kind of dangerous,
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about the state as, like, the ultimate expression of Ningen, right?
It's definitely complicated, and we have to be careful not to, like, impose our modern anxieties about authoritarianism onto Watsuji's thinking.
Okay.
Like, remember, he was writing in a very specific time,
Yeah.
a time of intense nationalism in Japan.
Right.
But here's the thing. While he did see the state as, like, the highest form of social organization, he didn't necessarily advocate for blind obedience or suppressing individual rights.
Okay, so how do we square that with, like, the state being the ultimate expression of Ningen? Especially when Ningen itself is all about this balance between the individual and the social.
That's where we'll need to dig a little deeper. For Watsuji, the state wasn't just some political entity, right?
Go.
It represented, like, the culmination of all the ethical relationships within a society.
Right.
He believed that the state had a moral obligation to guide individuals toward, like, a sense of shared responsibility and collective good.
Yeah. Okay.
But that didn't erase individual agency for him.
So it's more about the state providing a framework for ethical living
Okay.
rather than, like, dictating specific rules.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. But to really grasp Watsuji's view of the state, we need to consider another key element.
Okay.
His analysis of Japanese history and culture. So Watsuji, he was really wrestling with Japan's transition, right? Going from this isolated nation to one that's like increasingly connected with the whole world.
Right.
He even wrote a book called Closed Nation, Japan's Tragedy,
Oh, wow.
where he actually criticizes Japan's history of isolationism.
Oh.
Yeah, he saw it as like a departure from the country's more typical, openness to outside influences.
That's fascinating, especially because, we often think of Japanese culture as having this strong sense of national identity and, like, even insularity at times.
Right, exactly. And Watsuji recognized that tendency. But he argued that historically, Japan's strength actually came from its ability to, like, absorb and adapt ideas from other cultures.
Okay.
He saw that isolationist period as kind of like an anomaly almost,
Right.
a misstep that actually weakened the nation.
So how does that historical analysis connect back to his view of the state?
Well, it highlights this, like, importance of balance, right?
Okay.
Watsuji believed that a healthy state, it needs to be rooted in its own unique fudo,
Yeah.
but also open to the outside world. It's
Yeah.
that kind of interplay between, like, the particular and the universal that allows for growth and progress.
So it's not about the state, like imposing this rigid set of rules that are based only on tradition.
Right.
It's more about finding a way to kind of integrate those traditions
Yeah.
with the evolving needs of a society that's part of, this larger global context.
Precisely. And that takes us right back to the idea of adaga, that betweenness that shapes our ethical choices. For Watsuji, navigating this betweenness skillfully, that's the key to, both personal and societal well-being.
But how do we actually do that?
Right.
It seems like a pretty tall order, especially in a world that's becoming more and more complex and interconnected all the time.
It is. And Watsuji, he doesn't really offer a simple, like, recipe for it,
Right.
which can be frustrating,
Yeah.
especially if you're looking for, like, really clear-cut answers. Instead, he emphasizes the importance of cultivating what he calls ethical intuition.
Ethical intuition. So like a spidey sense for doing the right thing.
It's not quite as simple as that,
Okay.
but I like the analogy. It's more about developing, like, a sensitivity
Yeah.
to the nuances of our relationships and the specific fudo we're living in.
Oh.
It's kind of like this inner compass, right?
Yeah. That guides our actions. But it's not something we're, like, born with.
Right.
It's something we develop through, lived experience, reflection, and a deep understanding of our cultural and historical context.
So it's about becoming more tuned in to the betweenness all around us.
Yeah.
Recognizing the subtle ways our actions impact others and kind of ripple outward into the world.
Exactly. And Watsuji believed that we could actually strengthen this ethical intuition, right?
Yeah.
Through studying things like history, literature, philosophy,
Yes.
disciplines that help us understand, like, human nature and how complex ethical dilemmas can be. He also emphasized the importance of self-reflection, like really examining our own motivations and the potential consequences of our choices.
So it's like an ongoing process of learning and questioning
Yeah,
and kind of refining our understanding of what it means to, to act ethically in any given situation.
precisely. It's not about like blindly following rules.
Yeah. It's about cultivating a deeper understanding of how interconnected our actions are and trying to act in ways that, promote harmony and well-being for ourselves and for others.
This is making me think about how, like, different cultures might approach ethical decision-making.
Right.
If our Fido shapes our ethical intuition, doesn't that mean different cultures might have different ideas about what even counts as ethical behavior?
That's a great point. And it gets to the heart of one of the biggest, I think, challenges and opportunities in Watsuji's thinking.
Right.
He doesn't shy away from the fact that different cultures, shaped by their unique Fudo, right,
Right.
might have different ethical frameworks.
Yeah.
But instead of seeing that as like a problem, he suggests it's a chance to learn from each other,
Okay.
to broaden our understanding of what it means to live ethically in this diverse and interconnected world that we're all a part of.
So it's less about trying to find this one universal set of ethical rules
Right.
and more about, like, engaging in this cross-cultural dialogue
Yeah.
that allows us to, appreciate and learn from different perspectives.
Exactly. And this is where his critique of Western individualism becomes really relevant.
Okay.
He saw that tendency to prioritize individual rights above all else as potentially leading to a breakdown of like social cohesion
Right.
and a decline in ethical behavior.
It's almost like he's saying that when we lose sight of our interconnectedness, right, we become more self-centered,
Yes.
less concerned with the well-being of others, and
Yeah.
ultimately that undermines, like, the very fabric of society.
That's a key insight, yeah.
Yeah.
Watsuji believed that ethical behavior really flourishes in a society where individuals are aware of their social responsibilities, and they try to act in ways that benefit both themselves and the community as a whole.
So it's not about sacrificing our individuality. It's about understanding that our actions have consequences for other people and
Yeah.
taking responsibility for those consequences. It's like
Yes.
finding that balance
Yeah.
between individual freedom and social responsibility, right, that you were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And this balance, it's something that needs to be constantly negotiated and renegotiated as our relationships in the world around us change.
This is really making me rethink my own assumptions about ethics. It's
Yeah.
so easy to get caught up in, like, abstract principles and individual rights. But what Suji's reminding us that ethics is really about relationships.
Yeah.
It's about navigating that between yieldness with care and consideration.
It's a really powerful shift in perspective and one that I think is incredibly relevant in our increasingly interconnected world. Now, to really understand how this works in practice, we should look at how Watsuji applies these ideas to specific types of relationships.
Okay, so where do we start?
Well, he draws on traditional Confucian ethics, highlighting those 5 key relationships: parent and child, ruler and subject, husband and wife, elder and younger sibling, and friend and friend.
Those are like some pretty fundamental human connections, right?
Yeah.
I can see how understanding those relationships could be really important for ethical living.
Yeah.
But how does he approach them?
He believed that each of these relationships had its own unique idagara, its
Go.
own set of, like, obligations, responsibilities, and even ways of just being.
Right.
For instance, the parent-child relationship, it really emphasizes care and respect, right?
Mm-hmm.
While the ruler-subject relationship involves things like loyalty and obedience.
So it's like each relationship has its own set of, like, unwritten rules that guide our behavior.
Yeah.
But those rules are shaped by the specific fudo of that relationship, right?
Exactly. And for Watsuji, navigating these relationships well, that's the essence of ethical living.
Okay.
It's not about following some rigid set of universal principles. It's
Mhm.
about understanding the nuances of each connection and, acting accordingly.
But this brings us back to that tricky question of the state.
Okay.
If Watsuji sees these 5 relationships as so fundamental to ethical living, and the ruler-subject relationship involves obedience, doesn't that suggest some kind of, like, top-down approach to ethics where the state just dictates the rules?
That's a common concern, but I think it overlooks something really important about Watsuji's thinking.
Okay.
While he did stress the importance of the state, and he acknowledged that element of obedience in the ruler-subject relationship, he also recognized that individual agency and ethical responsibility are really crucial.
So it's not just blindly obeying the state. There's more to it than that.
Absolutely. Remember, for Watsuji, ethical action comes from our understanding of Adagra.
Right.
It's about recognizing that our actions have consequences for other people and that we have a responsibility to act in ways that promote like harmony and well-being.
So even within the ruler-subject relationship, there's still space for ethical deliberation.
Yeah.
It's not just a one-way street where the state dictates and the individual blindly
You
obeys.
got it. It's about finding that balance, that delicate balance between fulfilling our obligations to the state and acting in line with our own ethical intuition.
Yeah.
And remember, that intuition is shaped by our understanding of Fudo and the whole web of relationships that we're a part of.
This is really challenging me to rethink my own assumptions about, like, the relationship between the individual and the state.
Right.
It's not as simple as I thought.
That's what's so great about engaging with Watsuji's work. It pushes us to really wrestle with these complexities, to move beyond those like simplistic binaries. Now, if you're interested in how Watsuji sees the interplay between individual responsibility and the broader social good, we should dive into his analysis of public life.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm ready to hear more about how it all comes together.
Hmm.
Okay, so we've talked about Idagra and like how Watsuji sees it shaping our ethical actions in these, 5 key Confucian relationships.
Right.
But how does this play out on a bigger scale? Like, how does he see individuals like ethically engaging with the state and society as a whole?
That's where his idea of Kritiki Seikatsu comes in, what he calls public life. It's that space where we kind of move beyond just those one-on-one relationships and we come together as citizens to try and shape, our collective future.
Okay, so public life for Watsuji isn't just about like voting every few years or something.
Right.
It's about like actively participating in this ongoing process of shaping our society.
Exactly. It's about like engaging in dialogue, debate, collective decision-making,
Yeah.
bringing our unique perspectives to the table and working towards common goals even when we disagree.
So less about imposing our individual will and more about like finding ways to collaborate and build consensus.
Yeah.
It sounds like a pretty demanding vision of citizenship, especially in a world where, people are so polarized and kind of retreating into their own echo chambers.
It's definitely a challenge, and Watsuji, he recognized that.
Yeah.
He wasn't naive about how hard it can be to like navigate those differences and find common ground,
Right.
but he really believed that this kind of like active, engaged citizenship, it was essential for both individuals and for the collective to really flourish.
It's like saying that our individual lives, they gain meaning when we connect them to something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
When we're contributing to the well-being of our community, to the world around us.
Exactly.
But if our ethical intuition is shaped by our unique Fudo, how do we deal with those, like, inevitable differences in values and perspectives that come up when we're trying to engage in this public life?
That's where Watsuji's emphasis on dialogue and just like open-mindedness is so important. He believed that real progress in public life required us to be willing to listen to other people, to try and understand their viewpoints, and to find ways to bridge those differences even when they seem impossible to overcome. It's about like seeking common ground while still respecting that there will always be a diversity of perspectives in any society.
It sounds like he's arguing for this kind of like dialogue-based approach to politics and ethics,
Yeah.
where we engage with each other respectfully and we try to find solutions that benefit everyone, even if it means like compromising on some of our own individual preferences.
You got it, exactly. He saw this kind of open, respectful dialogue as like the foundation for creating a just and harmonious society, one where individual freedom and social responsibility are balanced in a way that allows everyone to, really thrive.
It's a beautiful vision, but I gotta say it feels a little idealistic given, the state of the world today.
I understand your skepticism, but I think Watsuji's philosophy gives us a really valuable framework for how to approach these challenges.
Okay.
Even in a world that often feels divided and fragmented, it reminds us that we're not just isolated individuals, we're beings in relation. Our actions, both in our personal lives and in the public sphere, they have consequences that ripple outwards.
It's a call to like step outside of our comfort zones, to engage with people who see things differently than we do and try to find ways to build bridges instead of walls. And it's a reminder that true fulfillment, it doesn't come from just chasing individual gain no matter the cost.
Right.
It comes from contributing to something larger than ourselves.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that interconnectedness of all things and embracing that betweenness, that space where our individual lives touch the lives of others and where we have this amazing opportunity to actually shape our shared destiny.
This deep dive into Watsuji's philosophy has been, well, honestly, it's been really challenging, but so insightful too.
Yeah,
He's given us so much to think about in terms of how we understand ourselves, our relationships, and our responsibilities to each other and the world.
I completely agree. His work offers such a unique perspective, and I think it can really help us navigate the complexity of our modern world to try and create a more just, compassionate, and interconnected future.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of Watsuji Tetsu. We hope you found this exploration as enriching as we have. Until next time, keep those minds curious, and remember, it's all about the betweenness.